Just a little bit about the ACLU generally, and then we'll get on into introductions and hearing from the people you want to hear talk. The ACLU of Kentucky has more than 8,000 members statewide. It's governed by a board of directors, by the membership, but its work is accomplished in more of a network of volunteers coordinated by staff, and we also have a couple of great attorneys as well in Louisville. The mission of the ACLU is preserving liberty. The American Civil Liberties Union of Kentucky is freedom's watchdog, working daily in courts, legislatures, and communities to defend the individual rights and liberties guaranteed to all people by the Constitution of the United States and the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We are going to talk about a lot of things. Specifically, we're going to focus on the 2019 legislative session. But in order to do that, I'd like to introduce the legislators that we have here with us. We're going to start on this end. The bag was opposite directions, so I'm going to point. This is State Representative Josie Raymond. Josie Raymond is a newly elected state representative for the Kentucky's 31st District. Which includes your favorite places in Hikes Point, J-Town, like the JCC, Village 8, TJ Maxx, and Feast Barbecue. So there you go. After growing up in a family that relied on the safety net, she has spent her career creating opportunity for people in poverty as a middle school teacher, a nonprofit manager, and now as a student success coach at the University of Louisville, where she supports freshmen at risk of dropping out. So thank you, Josie, for being here with us. In the middle, we have State Representative McKenzie Cantrell. She serves Kentucky's 38th House District, which is located in southern Jefferson County. Representative Cantrell was elected in 2016 and is currently the youngest woman serving in the General Assembly. Is that right?
I'm the youngest member now.
There you go. All right. She is a member of the following House committees: Judiciary, Economic Development and Workforce Investment, and Elections, Constitutional Amendments and Intergovernmental Affairs. That's a big one. Her work in Frankfort dovetails back to her work representing the people of the 38th District, an advocate for energy issues. This year, Representative Cantrell was named the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators State Leader for the state of Kentucky. She co-chairs the South Louisville's Opioid Task Force and was named Louisville's 40 Under 40 in 2018. She's introduced legislation on healthcare, transportation safety, employment law, telecommunications, and more. Representative Cantrell works for as a nonprofit attorney for low-income clients and advocates for Kentucky's working class and vulnerable populations. Representative Cantrell is a member of numerous community organizations and takes advantage of every opportunity to stay connected with constituents in the South End community she loves. And also she is a alumni of this school, so Brandeis alum. Thank you for being here. And last but not least, we have State Representative Jason Nemes. Jason Nemes serves Kentucky's 33rd House District, which covers East Louisville and part of Oldham County, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. Okay. Representative Nemes was elected in 2017. He is a member of the following House committees: Judiciary, State Government, Appropriations and Revenue, Elections, Constitutional Amendments, and Intergovernmental Affairs, and is the chair of the House Standing Committee BR Sub on Justice, Public Safety, and Judiciary. Like Representative Raymond, actually, Representative Nemes attended DuPont Manual High School, has his bachelor's from WKU, and his JD from our very own Brandeis. So, can give them all a round of applause. Senator Thomas sends his messages. He was unable to come for medical reasons. I just got an email this morning, so it was very last minute. He wanted to be here today, but we are happy to have the representatives here. So I guess we can start off. I'm just going to do a quick overview of the ACLU agenda, and then we're going to open it up to questions. This session was an interesting one. Some of the things that the ACLU was focusing on, which we will talk in great detail about, was Senate Bill 18, the Pregnant Workers Bill, criminal justice reform, and mainly in bail reform. Also, some other issues that the ACLU is always pushing, but particularly in the legislative context, is banning conversion therapy and restoration of voting rights are some of the few. And defensively, this would be in the courts more so, would be protecting attacks on the First Amendment, restrictions on abortion access, and threats to immigrant rights, as well as attacks on LGBTQ plus community. So I'm going to kind of switch over to this seat so we can all have a conversation, but I just want to open it up and we can just kind of go down the line or however you all want to do it. But just to kind of get a sense of this session, if you all could talk about a bill that you were happy to see made it through, or a bill that you just thought was a really positive kind of aspect of this shorter session. So wherever you guys want to start.
My first.
Sure.
Let's say first, thank you guys, ACLU, for hosting this. I think this is an important event. I like it when younger people, not that you guys are too young, but younger people get involved. I think it's really important whether you're on the right or the left. I also want to thank my Federal Society friends to my left for making me not the only Republican in this room. So thank you guys for that. I think this session was, this is my third session. This is Representative Cantrell's third session and Representative Raymond's first session. And each of the three sessions has had its own flavor. This one, I think, is a social conservative's dream. A lot got accomplished. And I say social conservative rather than rural Republican, because a lot of the issues have nothing to do or have very little to do with party. They have more to do with urban-rural divide. And I'll mention a few of those, but and then I'll get to the question on what I'm happy passed and what I wish would have. So there were two bills in particular I want to talk about that really highlighted the rural-urban divide. And one was Senate Bill 150. That was the concealed carry law. What in Kentucky and in many states, you have to get a license to be able to conceal carry. And there's no license to be able to open carry in Kentucky, and that's what our 1890 Constitution said, that our legislature could regulate the carrying of concealed weapons, because we recognize it's different, right? If I'm in Kroger and I see somebody open carrying, I say, that dude may be wacko, I'm going to the next aisle. Or if you're in a zoning meeting, the law enforcement can say, okay, I see that person's carrying, they can keep an eye on them. When you're concealed, you can't do that. And so we also think that people should be able to have training, be required to have training and background checks and so forth. And so what this bill did was, I think we're now one of 14 states maybe that don't have any requirement for concealed carry, so you can conceal carry without getting a license. In my view, I don't really care about the license. What I care about is the training and the background check, and so you no longer have to do that in Kentucky. So how does that come into rural-urban divide? Well, there are 27 legislators that are in Louisville and Lexington. And I think 2 of them voted for it. One was a guy from Louisville, one was a guy from Lexington. The rest of us voted against it. Republican and Democrat didn't matter. And in the in the rural areas, almost every legislator voted for it. It passed with overwhelming majorities. And so that's bill number 1 to make the point. Bill number 2 to make the point is there was a bill that was to require the placement of "In God We Trust" in every school building. It said national motto, but it's obviously "In God We Trust." And so the law in Kentucky was that it was permitted by the boards of education to allow, or maybe to require their schools at the local level to post "In God We Trust" in a conspicuous place, whatever that means, over the library, over the school. We don't know what that means. Neon signs out front. We don't know exactly what that means, but conspicuously placed. So it was allowed, but some folks wanted to make it required. I think, I haven't looked at the Lexington vote, I should have. In Louisville, of the 18 legislators in Louisville, only 1 voted for it. And it passed with overwhelming majorities. So that's 2 bills that highlight an important divide, I think, more so than even party, and that is rural-urban issues. What am I proudest about? I'm not really proud about too much that we've done this year. I am proud of a few things, and even the thing that I'm most proud about has a but. And I'll tell that, and then I'll say but. The thing I'm most proud about is our response to the shooting in Marshall County last year. We put together a bipartisan, bicameral group, and that group went all around the state, and they took input from stakeholders, from folks in the know, and said, okay, how can we make our schools safer? And they came up with a bill that passed with overwhelming majorities. I think maybe one in the House voted against it. I don't know how many in the Senate. There may have been a few more in the House that voted against it. The point is, it's a bipartisan, I think, a very smart bill, and I'm hopeful that it will do what we intended to do, which is to not only make our schools safer from shootings, but also to identify students who need help, who need assistance, interventions, and be able to assist those folks. Okay, now for the but. It wasn't funded. This is a short session, and so it's not a quote-unquote budget session. We did open the budget, so we really don't have much of an excuse in my mind. But we didn't fund how much. We didn't fund the requirements for extra counselors and so forth at the school level. When I talked about it, because I'm on appropriation of revenue, when I talked about it with my leadership, one thing they mentioned, and I think this is responsible. I wish we would have went ahead and tried to fund some of it, but we need to make sure how much it costs, because each school board can handle it in different ways. So we need to know exactly what it costs, and we'll put it in the budget next year. We're committed to doing that. I'm confident it will be funded. I wish we would have made an effort to at least partially fund it this year. So that's what I'm proudest of, even though there's the but there. The thing I'm the most upset about, and I'm going to give the mic over quick, that's the proverbial mic, is medical marijuana. It didn't pass. It has, we had, when we adjourned sine die just means the end of the session. When we adjourned sine die, we had 53 co-sponsors, which is almost unheard of for a particular bill. And I've looked in the eyes and have commitments from 65 legislators, and I'm talking about serious commitments, not the kind that's like, I'm for you, McKenzie. You know, these are real commitments to vote for the bill, 65 of them. So, and there'll be more than that, but there's 65 hard commitments, including the Speaker of the House. And it voted out of committee, 16-1. And so that shows overwhelming majority support it. I, along with a few others, are the primary pushers of medical marijuana in the House. That didn't sound right. Sponsors. But that's the thing that I'm most upset about. I am very happy about the progress that's been made, and we start in a very strong position next session on medical marijuana. But that, I think, is the thing I'm probably most upset about.
I think that, we just adjourned on midnight Thursday night, and before
11:55.
before, I think I usually have to be a little bit further removed than we are today before I give like a headline type answer about what I think this session was, because I know in my first session in 2017, I look back on it differently today than I did in 2017. I do really appreciate Representative Nemes saying it was a social conservative's dream, because I think it comes out differently from you than it would have if I said that, but it's absolutely true. And I do have a lot of mixed feelings. I don't know if you all have had a chance to read Debbie Yetter's article in the Courier-Journal about some of the really inflammatory rhetoric that went on a couple times during the session about, when we do these abortion bills, there's no doubt about it. There's 138 members of the General Assembly. There's 138 deeply held convictions about something very fundamental about us, which is when life begins. So, you can't expect anything different than there to be really intense debate about that. It's not that. But I think after the debate and in some circumstances around that, it was somewhat inflamed. But when you talk about the bills that we did, I'll agree with Representative Nemes, and I'm a co-sponsor of his medical marijuana legislation. That night, and I don't know, it had been a long day, we had that Judiciary Committee meeting upon adjournment, and it was about 8 or 9 o'clock when we finished that up, and I don't know if it had just been a really long day, and it was about 2/3 of the way into session, but, that feeling when that bill passed committee, there were people hugging, crying, unlike anything I had ever really experienced before. People were just so happy. And I can't tell you how good that felt to see people, relieved that they didn't have to worry, that they were moving something forward where they wouldn't have to worry about potentially being criminals anymore, having their children taken away from them because of something that they're using most likely to treat pain or a legitimate medical condition. That felt good, and that was a feeling unlike any other I'd really had since I'd been a member of the General Assembly. If you're talking about legislation that went all the way that we're really proud of, Representative Nemes and I actually sponsored the pregnant worker bill in 2017. So I know we're both really proud of that. It's funny because we're both attorneys, but I really truly believe that this bill or this new law will will avoid litigation. That's what it's meant to do. It's meant to give employers guidance on reasonable accommodations that they can make for their pregnant workforce, because society, I mean, no one is any better off. Mother, child, the workplace. You know, we just had Equal Pay Day yesterday. No one is better off with when a woman, because of her pregnancy, loses her job. No one's better off. Even if a woman gets fired and she might have a great legal case, but where does that leave someone with a newborn child, talking to her attorney about potentially bringing a lawsuit? That's not what we want. And Kentucky is, I think, doing a great thing and making real strides in passing that bill. So I guess the governor hasn't signed it yet, not that I know of. But he's still got about 4 or 5 more days at least. So that's probably what I'm most proud about. And we're going to talk about more legislation. We might talk some more about. I kind of agree with Representative Nemes. The voting on Senate Bill 150, the concealed carry legislation, was probably one of the biggest surprises of the session. I never thought we would have voted. Not that I was surprised at how the vote went. I think I was surprised that we even voted on it at all. I think it put a lot of us, especially Republicans who had gotten previous support from the NRA and then voted against it, in really awkward positions. I think it obviously, when Representative Nemes talked about the urban and rural divide, he talked about the numbers. We're never going to have a majority of the votes as urban members of the legislature. So that's just a fact. But we're really going to feel, I think, a lot of the effects of this new law in the same regard. So I'll let Josie probably has all sorts of impressions about how this went as a new member.
So I was just elected last November, so this was my first session. And from what I can tell, it was quite a session to be your first session.
That's the way we felt about ours too, the first time.
I learned an awful lot about how a bill gets passed, how legislation's crafted, about myself, about other people. And having grown up in Louisville, moved to bigger cities around the country, and then moved back to Louisville, I learned a lot about values throughout the rest of the state, where I haven't spent much time. I didn't like much of what we did. I lost a whole lot, right? And Jason and I sit on the same row. We were joking one day because my day was just, there's a nay button we push to vote no, nay, 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 nay. And he's like, how's that feel? I've hardly ever voted nay. I said, it feels terrible.
I said, Josie, does your green button work? Let's hit the green button.
It feels terrible.
I always love it when my seatmate's not there and I'll vote for them, and then I'll have voted yes and no, and I was like, I feel really good.
So I thought we did some things that are gonna, harm Kentuckians in the long run. We cut bank taxes, $50-something million without funding school counseling. In my district, I'm hearing from folks about this concealed carry bill that they're feeling more at risk than they ever have, and I live in the district where a racist assassinated black people at Kroger. Right. So that's very personal over where we are in the Stony Brook area. We saw continuous attacks on women's autonomy. We banned abortion 3 or 4 times, and now the courts are blocking those. So I kept seeing that it didn't feel to me at some points that we were legislating. It felt like we were creating judicial cases, passing legislation just to immediately go into the judicial branch.
Or talking points for the next election.
And then I noticed a strategy where something bad would be introduced, then something horrible would be introduced, and then they want you to then accept the bad. because it's not the horrible. So examples would be there was a threat of cutting unemployment insurance from 26 weeks to 20. There was a threat to start drug testing at their own cost, people who receive food stamps, for instance. And so it felt like we were getting slapped and then told, well, you should thank us for not kicking you. If I had to name positive legislation, I also would name the Pregnant Workers Act. That's not to say this is a wonderful bill, but if that's the best one we all can think of, I think that is a problem.
That's right.
It passed with overwhelming support in both houses. The few people who voted against it said things like, I don't think this is good for business.
Even though the chamber supported it.
Which was not borne out because
Yeah.
business supported this bill. And then there was a woman who voted against it, and she said, well, if women want to be equal, we can't start asking for different accommodations, which didn't make sense to me because my body is different than Jason's body.
It is.
And we don't tell people they can't, wear their glasses at work.
Yeah.
So if something's happening with your body and you need an accommodation, it just makes sense. So that was one of a small handful of positive things that we did.
I want to note that neither one of those bills, the unemployment bill or the drug treatment bill, passed. And neither one of them, even one of them, I think, was voted out of committee. But I wanted to make sure that was clear.
But I do want to point out, we just had an election last year, and we're up for re-election all the time. So we're really deeply connected to the communities we serve. And I think when you take this legislative session and you compare it to some of the things that you heard around the time that people needed to get reelected, I think you heard different things. I think we did different things than what you heard at the time. Because, in our districts are different in Jefferson County than anywhere else, but I don't knock on someone's door and hear them talk about, posting "In God We Trust" in our schools. Now, people, I do very much believe that people think that God needs to be in our schools, and some of the people I serve, I do think genuinely believe that. But I think people are more concerned about jobs, their roads, healthcare, the quality and funding of public education, and our pension system than anything else. So I don't think that the work that we did on those issues really matches what our constituents wanted us to be doing.
I think that's right. From the Republican side, the NRA, their number one goal was the concealed carry bill. So that was something that Republicans had committed to. And the reason I got a D from NRA, because I told them how I'd vote on concealed carry. And if you ask me where I stand, I'll tell you where I stand, whether it's LGBTQ issue or NRA issue, because that's just how I think we ought to behave. And so I told them I was going to vote no on that and received a D rating. And most of my colleagues, Republican and Democrat, told them they'd vote yes, and they did. But I think McKenzie's right. When I knock on a door, they're not talking about those types of issues. They're talking about, the number one issue, at least in my area, is traffic. That's what we talk about. Is we're exploding in population, especially in the East End and in southern Oldham County, and traffic is the biggest issue. We also talk about economic development, and that's one of the things that I'm most upset about, and I will disagree on what it exactly looks like. But we didn't do much in the way of economic development this year, and I'm hoping that we turn our eye back toward economic development, and because Kentucky needs that in the worst way. And if you have growth, business growth with economic growth, then it solves so many problems. It solves a lot of problems with our families. It solves a lot of problems with our schools. We need more funding for schools. So it is, in my view, the most important thing we should be doing in Frankfort is trying to stoke the fires of business. I must explain the bank tax because my friend took a shot there. So and not unfair, but I want to give my perspective of it. So the bank tax, it was $52 million reduction in bank tax. But I'll make 4 really quick points. Number one, the way Kentucky taxed its banks was in the overwhelming minority of states.
It was a special tax called the bank franchise tax.
The bank franchise tax, and what it did was it taxed deposits. So number one, we were in the minority. Number two, the banks were averaging a tax of about 13%. Our corporations and other entities, LLCs, LLPs, are taxed at 5%, so that was unfair. Number three, when you tax deposits and the capital that the bank has on hand, it incentivizes misbehavior. Not it's sinister behavior, but misbehavior. We want banks to be capitalized. But when you're taxing their capital, rather than their like most states do, then you're telling them you need to have less capital and be a less strong bank, a weaker bank. So that's number 3. And the most important thing, 23 of our local banks had been taken over by banks from out of state because they have a much more favorable tax rate. Well, 23 banks is important. You know, there were none in Louisville, but there was one in Owensboro. There were a few all over the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And so when we lose our banks, we lose employees, and we lose money. And so while it's going to cost $52 million, what the actuarial analysis didn't include was what we were going to lose if we didn't make a change and we lost a lot of our more of our banks than 23 that we've already lost. And I will note that was a strongly bipartisan bill.
I voted for it. One of the things that it's easy to miss when you're talking about these bills is it's really easy to say and especially when you're running for election, you're talking about your values. It's really easy to say, somebody will ask you, are you for or against something, and you take a stand. Nobody really explains to you what to do when something that you're for and against are in the same bill. And what Representative Nemes is talking about is a bill that was called wasn't really the tax cleanup, it was really a revenue sort of cleanup bill. And Republicans are in charge, or started to be in charge for the first time in 2017. 2018 was a budget year, was their first budget. And we have separate bills called the revenue bill and the appropriations bill, one that raises the money, the other one that appropriates the money. And they made some mistakes when they, I think they would admit that, they made some mistakes when they wrote that piece of legislation. I think one of the mistakes was not vetting it publicly and including us. But regardless, there were unintended consequences is the legislative term that we use. One of those unintended consequences is the way nonprofits were taxed and the way that revenue was going to be collected. It impacted this university. It impacted all universities, nonprofits, churches all around the state. And the cleanup to fix that unintended consequence, the nonprofits, was also in that bill as well. And I don't really think it's fair. A lot of us said we wanted to fix that nonprofit mistake that was made. I don't think it was really fair that a lot of other stuff was thrown in there, but I stood by what I said and decided to go along with fixing that.
I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm sorry to interrupt you because I do want to get to some student questions, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say bankruptcy is probably over a little bit of our heads in the law school. But so I want to shift gears a little bit into some student questions. Senate Bill 100, someone asked if you could talk a little bit about Senate Bill 100 and what happened with that. So, Jason, I'll leave it to you.
That's a long story.
All right, yeah. So Senate Bill 100 is
We could have spent the whole hour just talking about that.
We can abbreviate it as much as possible.
So it's net metering bill. So we have a couple priorities. One priority is to incentivize, at least some of us have a couple priorities, is to incentivize the increased usage of solar panels and so forth. There are not many. I think there are 18 in my district. There are not many in Kentucky.
There's like 1,000 across the
Right.
state.
So there's not many, but we want to incentivize more and more of that. While at the same time making sure that our regular folk who are too poor to have or don't choose to have solar panels don't have to subsidize those who get them. And so so the whole question, and I'm going to put it in my way, and they're going to disagree with the way I set it up, I guess, is the whole question is how much does a solar panel owner get to sell their power that they don't use back onto the grid? So if you're in my district and you get you buy LG&E gets their power by for 4 cents. They sell it for 10. Okay, and so if you have a solar panel, and this is the numbers that are about right, but they're not exactly right. So the solar panel owner doesn't have to pay any of that for what they generate. But when they put it back on the market, what do they get to sell it for? And the answer was 10 cents, which we think was not fair, because the utility they get a 6 cents profit under my hypothetical there. They get a 6 cents profit they should continue to get. They shouldn't have to buy it from the solar panel for 10 cents when they buy it on the market for 4 cents. And within that money that the solar panel owner is selling it back for 10 cents, they're not paying for things like line restoration and so forth and so on, and upkeep and all that. Now what they would say is we don't use as much, and there are other benefits to solar usage, and there certainly are. And those things should be compensated, but I don't think they should be compensated by the other power users. If we want to compensate them, we want to give a credit or whatever, that's something the legislature should do by way of a credit and not making our other power users pay for it. So that's the approach that my understanding is I approached the bill. I voted against what was then, I don't remember what number it was last year, but the Senate Bill 100 iteration last year
227.
227, because I thought, it was House Bill then, wasn't it? Because I thought it unfairly treated the solar panel owner. And what they told me was, we want, because we set the rates in the legislature, what they said was then, they said, we want this to be a PSC thing, Public Service Commission, which sets the rates that we all pay in utilities. And so we want it to go to the utility so we can make the argument pros and cons. And the utility can make their argument pros and cons, and then they'll set the rate. Well, that's what we gave them this year. So in my view, we gave them exactly what they asked for last year when they were against the bill, and yet they were against the bill again. So it indicated to me, and I don't think this is true about all the advocates, because I know a lot of the advocates. Fitz is one of them who, if he told me that if I'm looking at that pen, I see blue, and he said red, I'd have to get closer because I trust him that much. But I believe we gave them almost everything they asked for, if not everything. And I think the ball was moved. And I think the intent was for a lot of those folks is to do whatever they had to do to prop up solar panel because they believe in it so much, which I also believe in it, but I just don't think it should be subsidized by poor folks who can't afford to put solar panels on their roofs. So that's what it was. So there was a lot of machinations. We passed the bill, and then the Senate passed the bill. The Senate passed the bill, then we passed it with a floor amendment, and we come together, the Senate and the House, and the Democrats, I think, liked what the House floor amendment, or at least could live with it, and so they were wanting it to stay on there. It didn't stay on there, and then we ended up passing the Senate version at the later, I think March 20, whatever it was, the last day.
Before we went on the veto
Before we went on the veto period. And so I think some House Democrats were upset that we didn't fight back enough in the Senate, with the Senate, and keep the floor amendment on there. I voted for the floor amendment. I would have rather it been on there, but I think what passed was better than what exists today. So that's kind of Senate Bill 100.
I'm going to say 2 or 3 things really quickly about the bill, and then because Representative Raymond was on the committee that heard it. I was on the committee in Natural Resources my first term, so I've been around this bill a lot as well. I'm going to disagree with Representative Nemes. The studies that have looked at the question of are solar customers being subsidized by non-solar customers, at best say that even if they are, it is like a fraction of a cent, not even real money that you can hold in your hand. So I know it's easy to make that statement, but it doesn't really hold up. The second thing that I will say about, if you have solar, you're not paying for the infrastructure. LG&E does have a base rate that you have to pay for the privilege of being an LG&E customer. If LG&E raised that rate or had a separate rate for solar customers, that should alleviate that concern about infrastructure and sharing the responsibilities of the grid and infrastructure. And the third thing that I'll say is I voted against this bill because I have 2 constituents in my community who own solar installation businesses. No matter what you believe, I do think that this legislation disincentivizes the use of solar and would harm their businesses, and that's what we go there to do, is to serve the people who we serve. So that was obviously a foremost concern in my mind as well.
Jason, I do agree with your description of it, but then it's just how we interpret it, right? So if Susie buys solar panels, you're generating power and you're selling it back for 10 cents. Then when there's a thunderstorm, you're buying it back. No, you're selling it back for 3 cents under this law, and then when there's a thunderstorm, you're buying back your own power at 10 cents. So you use the word fairness.
You could buy a battery.
Fairness looks different.
Or you could live in a capitalistic society like most Republicans believe.
You know what's going to happen, though? An unintended
Sell it back at wholesale rates and buy it at retail rates.
unintended consequence
or
of
house
this
it on your own.
is that everybody's going to buy batteries. So
That's a
people
good
who
thing.
can't afford solar power will take themselves off the grid, and LG&E won't be getting the positive benefits. But it's a question of fairness, which is open to interpretation, right?
Right.
Equity is
Yes.
harder to square
That's right.
than equality. With this amendment that Jason's talking about, there was some inter-party deal making, and deals were broken, and trust was broken. And like my parents used to say to me when I was a teenager, trust is easier to keep than to rebuild.
Yeah.
And so I think Democrats are going to have a long memory about SB 100 going into next year.
And I wasn't involved in those deals and those promises. I don't know about them. I understand that some people thought there were. And in fact, a number of Republicans didn't vote on that bill because they were concerned about breaking deals. I was involved in that, so I can't speak to whether it was either way. I do think it's important because I do believe we want to increase our solar panel market in Kentucky. I think it's good. One thing we've done terribly in Kentucky is we've relied much too much on coal. I mean, I love coal. The coal communities, it's done so much for those communities, and they're hurting right now. But we have to diversify our energy consumption and our energy portfolio in Kentucky. To McKenzie's points, all those points can be made to the Public Service Commission, and I hope and trust they will be. And I hope the Public Service Commission takes those into account. But bottom line for me were two things. One, I want to incentivize, not disincentivize, but I want to incentivize solar usage, and I don't want that to be on the back of poor folks who can't put solar panels on their roofs. So that's Senate 100.
There we go. So that's great. I think you guys can see that, with differing opinions, but at the end of the day, and I think something that the media doesn't portray is that there is so much bipartisan efforts
Not
behind
enough.
the scenes. Not enough, but
Right.
a lot more than the media would like to shed light on.
We
And-
all get along well.
Right.
Yeah.
We all, as Representative Raymond pointed out, we all sit close to each other on the
Right.
floor. Jason and
So
I
cracking
came.
jokes all the time.
We are, probably at others' expense.
Right.
Who are. We came in together, and we've served on a lot of the same committees together. So you can't say that 100 people. You're not gonna even like 100 people. Sitting in the same room together. But for the most part, I do really like and respect a lot of the people who we serve with. I really do. You understand why they get elected. You understand that a lot of their beliefs, even if they're different from yours, are really, genuinely held beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you understand how they are a reflection of where they serve.
And I say two things. I think to that point, there's a lady named Joni Jenkins in the House of Representatives, and we had an emotional beginning to the session because we were fighting over one vote in a race, and it seemed to me like the Democrats were thinking we're going to steal the race when somebody challenged it, and we are legally obligated to take that challenge, to take the contest and consider it, and we did various things. And Josie was on the committee that was appointed.
You guys know what he's talking about, the House race in Owensboro that was
Yeah.
decided by one vote.
And so the Democrats were standing up saying,
When I was in law school, I did not know any of these things.
Oh, that's a fair point.
So,
That's
I
what
mean,
I
I'm
didn't-
just trying to give context.
No, I didn't either. That's a fair point. They're a lot smarter than we were. So the Democrats were standing up and acting like we were going to steal the race, and I was perplexed. I went over to Joni. I said, Joni, do you really think that Speaker David Osborne and we're going to steal the race? And she said, yes, I think he'll try. And so right then, I was stunned by that. I was thinking, out of all the things that we're going to do, we're not going to. Why would we need to steal the race? Because we already have super majorities. A 62nd person wouldn't mean anything. I mean, it doesn't mean anything really because we're already in super control of the General Assembly. But so she thought that, and I was like, whoa, hold on a second. So I stopped and thought, if some people said that, I'd be like, whatever. But Joni said that, so it meant something to me, and I was like, okay, all right. So now I have to approach this question differently because people that approach questions in good faith really believe that we're going to do this. Now, I would say that her beliefs are probably informed by the fact that former leadership would have tried to do that, but we weren't going to do that. But
And Representative Jenkins has been there a long time, and
Right.
I think a lot of us are informed by the way our tenure in the legislature. So Representative Raymond probably, just pointed out that she perceives the Republican majority differently because of Senate Bill 100. I perceive the Republican majority differently because of Senate Bill 151, the pension bill last year,
Yeah.
and all of the mistakes, the abruptness, the blatant unconstitutionality of that, and I think the Supreme Court took care of that, but I hold that right here and know that if a group or leadership or somebody wants a bill to pass. And we're in session, and they have the votes to do it, they can make it so.
And that opinion actually made it worse because it said that we can waive the second and third readings, so now we can get things done in one day and not 5. So I think
Which
it made
is
it worse.
what the Constitution says, but
It
it's
does say
never,
that, but
it's
it's
never been done.
And I wouldn't
And
know.
they did point that out.
Right, that the Kentucky, these kind of gamesmanships that 151 was involved in had been used by Republicans and Democrats for decades. Doesn't make it right. I've condemned that process, but it's not like we just conjured it up recently. But I do want to make this other point. And I think that all three of us are involved in this because you guys had 32 newbies this year, newly elected people this year.
That's the combination of the House.
Republican and Democrat, and then
Uh-huh.
we had 38, I think, when McKenzie and I came in. And so the overwhelming majority of the House is now people who have served for 3 years or less. And so I think we look at questions a lot differently because when somebody asks me what's the worst part about Frankfort, and I think this is the worst part, and it's not even a close second, is because they're Democrats, I'm supposed to demonize them and not work with them, try to crush them, try to beat them. And because I'm a Republican, they're supposed to do the same thing to me, which is not helpful. I think it's actually very harmful. But I think there's less of that for the new folks. When I say new folks, I'm talking about 2016, our class down, than there is for the older folks and people who've been there longer. I hope we can do better. You know, one of the things I try to do when I introduce bills, I try to get Democrats as co-sponsors on every single one of them. I make that an active effort to work with a Democrat on every single bill.
One of them.
And McKenzie is one of them a lot of times. You know, I'm working with Charles Booker on some very important criminal justice reform things. And so we've got, I think that's the way we ought to behave. We're not going to agree all the time, but we should try our best to behave in that way because that's what we were elected to do. I represent 45,000 and change people and in my district, and there's a whole lot of Democrats in there. There's a whole lot of Republicans, and there's 10% independents. And so I didn't go there to be a right-wing nut job. They didn't elect me to do that, or a left-wing nut job. They elected me to try to think through issues, which is what I try to do. I think that's why I frustrate a lot of people because, I vote against my party quite often and fight against my party often. The thing I'm proudest of all was my fight against the gang bill 2 years ago. It passed, so I'm prouder of a loss than anything I've accomplished. But that's we have to try, and I think. The new people, the new Democrats, and I think the new Republicans are trying to bet more.
And I don't want to give you all the wrong idea, but a lot of the bills that we've talked about today have been some of the most controversial ones, and I understand why we're talking about them because they were controversial. We believe very strongly about what we've said that we believe and we did on those bills. But what's not reported a lot is probably for every really controversial bill we have 5 or 6 bills a day that we vote on. And there might be maybe 1 or 2 no votes. It'll be like 95 to 1 or 2, and
90,
you're not
95 to Lynn Beckler.
Right. You're not gonna hear that. It doesn't make good news. It's not click worthy. It's not anything. But in case you're wondering whether those things do really happen, they do every single day.
I think that's a good segue. We have a lot of student questions, but we don't have all the time in the world. So I think this is a good question to end on, and we'll have you kind of start off. But looking forward, what are some important issues that you would like to see tackled? You mentioned, I was going to mention this, the gang bill with another Jefferson County Representative Scott. You all have worked together on that in a bipartisan effort. So whether it's in the criminal justice realm or kind of any kind of realm, what do you in the future kind of hope to see come up and tackled?
You know what I'm going to talk about.
This is great. Y'all are gonna love it.
We need pre-K for all in the state of Kentucky. So pre-K is full day public education for 4 and 5-year-olds. There's misconceptions. Some people think that's daycare babysitting where the kids are just running around crazy all day. That's not what it is. Some people think it's putting a 4-year-old on the desk for 8 hours a day, and that's not what it is, right? But those of us with children, especially children in high-quality child care settings, know that this is absolutely critical for developing all kinds of skills in them. We live in a state and a city where only 50% of our kindergartners are kindergarten ready when they get to kindergarten. That means they can identify their letters, they can trace a triangle, they can walk backwards, right? 50% of our kids cannot do those things.
Maybe that's because we fund kindergartners as if they were half a person. Let's talk about that.
So in our school, I had 2 bills this session. One was to bring pre-K for all to Kentucky, which would do so much for the children, not just in kindergarten readiness, but in social emotional learning, conflict resolution, delay of gratification. We know from data that these impacts last for decades and decades. You want a well-behaved 60-year-old, you want a well-behaved 3-year-old. That's how it works.
And so much for working families.
It does a lot for maternal workforce participation, right? And you think about pre-K.
You don't even want to know what she pays in child care, y'all. You really don't.
I'll tell you, it's $22,000.
Y'all.
And you're going to do it too. We think about pre-K in cities like Washington, D.C. and New York City. But this is not a super radical idea. Oklahoma, Florida, and Georgia our leaders in this so we can get this done. There's Republican interest in this. I think a Republican named Steve Sheldon out of Bowling Green is going to carry the pre-K bill next year, and we're going to work together on that. Kindergarten was my second bill, and it was to fully fund full-day kindergarten. Kentucky only requires, it requires that children show up to school when they're 6 years old. And I was talking to a child abuse advocate, and she said, do you know what a big difference it would make if we could lay eyes on children when they're 4 instead of when they're 6? And that was a benefit I never even thought of. But for kindergarten, in the school funding model, 1st grade through 12th grade are funded a certain way. Kindergartners, because we only mandate half a day for our kindergartners, the school funding model funds them at 0.5. And the black humor joke I use is I thought we were done in America counting people as fractions. But we're counting our kindergartners as fractions. I have a 5-year-old, and she's no different than a 6-year-old. So most of our districts are paying for full-day kindergarten. Some of you all are thinking, well, I went to kindergarten all day. The district pays it. So JCPS is paying the second half of the day of kindergarten.
We have a huge problem in this state of passing funding mandates onto our local school districts.
Yes. And so that's coming at the expense of additional services for our youngest and most vulnerable students and staffing. So these are issues that I brought up this year, started a conversation, got Republican interest, right, built the relationships that I need to continue pushing this issue. Next year's a budget year, though. And so we'll see what our priorities are. A lot of times you hear in Frankfurt, and I used to hear before I was there, oh, we didn't get to that. We ran out of time. Now that I've been there a session, I'm going to say that's lies, lies, lies. It's priorities. We can get to what we need to get to.
I think we tend to think really short-sighted in the legislature. I really wish that we could be in a position to think a little bit more long-term. I think we think about the next session, and as House members, you know, I'm guaranteed 2020. I'm not guaranteed 2021, so I do have to prioritize because you're not promised another day after your next election without the help of the voters. So we are thinking about next year. I think at least there was a senator who says he's already pre-filing a bill for the 2020 session. I probably won't pre-file anything until August or September, but next year is a 60-day session. They call that our long session. We'll be in session from January until about April 15th. We have an opportunity to pass more bills, but we're also very focused on the state budget, how we fund the state budget, and how we look for revenue to help. I'm not going to say solve, we're not going to fix it, but how we can help alleviate the burden that our pension crisis is putting on the rest of the state is probably our number one job right now. It's difficult, it's hard, tough decisions have been made already, tough decisions are going to be made for probably the next 20 to 30 years, but that's what we're going to have to do to be able to fund full-day kindergarten, to be able to fund the things that I know you all want, and I know that a lot of us are going to agree with, but we have to come up, like at the end of the day, we have to come up with the money to do that.
So I want to make sure that we do a better job of protecting Louisville from, I don't want to say attacks, but from harm. I'm on the Appropriation Revenue Committee. I'm one of the 9 members, because I chair a subcommittee that's in charge of court budget and Justice Cabinet. I'm one of 9 people who write the budget in Kentucky in the House. And so I want to make sure that we're protecting Louisville. We brought more money back to Louisville. Last time it was 9.7%, and last year it was 14% in the road fund, for instance. And so we're getting more of our quote-unquote fair share, but we need to do more of that. And so I want to make sure that I'm putting myself in a position to protect our home in our Louisville and Oldham County. But I also want to make sure that we do a better job in the budget for a lot of things. The pension is hurting our ability to do almost anything. It's elbowing out everything. It's almost tripled in the percentage of the budget that it's occupied in 10 years.
Our corrections budget's very high.
Our corrections
You work
budget,
on that.
$650 million for the first time. 10 years ago, when I ran the administrative office of the courts, the corrections budget was $350, now it's $650. So it's out of control. We've got 3 areas in Kentucky that are out of control funding, and I'm not making any value judgments. I'm just looking at numbers. That's pensions, Medicare, Medicaid, and corrections costs. We have to control those costs, or we're not going to have money to do anything that we want to do in pre-K or anything else. It's just the money's not there. So we have to focus on growth. The answer to the question is not more taxes, although we need tax reform in some areas. The answer to the question is growth because that's the only thing that's going to get us out of the problems that we're currently in. And so, you know, we have to have a good budget, but these things are to sustain us. I want to say a couple things about long term. Long term is we have to do better on criminal justice reform for all kinds of reasons. It's good for families, it's good for communities, it's good for budgets, it's good for the individual. And so who's it not good for? I don't know. And if we talk about tough on crime, that's the pushback we always get. I think it's tougher on crime to fully fund like human trafficking, which we didn't fully fund last year, than it is to have possession. Class D possessions are driving our incarceration rates, and that's just foolish. That's not tough. That's foolish. And so we have to do better on criminal justice reform for a bunch of reasons. In workforce development, we've got to get our workforce development numbers up. We've talked about a way to get it up for maternal workforce development, but we have to get it up across the board. We have too many people who are able-bodied and who are working age who are drawing on government assistance. We need to find out how we can assist them to get back to work, whether that's welfare or Medicaid or whatever. Not taking benefits from them, that's not the answer, but getting them back to work, getting them back on their feet so they can provide for their families. The last thing I want to say, and this is very personal to me, I grew up in McKenzie's district. I'm a kid from both sides of the track, if you will. Mother and father were divorced when I was 2 and other things, but our families in Kentucky have been destroyed. I'm not making a right-wing argument here. I'm talking about mom, dad, only mom, only dad. I don't care. We've got to protect our families, and we're not. We're hurting our families. They've been destroyed in Kentucky, and we have to support our families. That's the basic unit of government. It's the basic unit of human civilization, and we've got to support our families. We don't do that enough in Kentucky.
I think that's a great place to end, and we do have another class, so I don't want to infringe on that class. So if we could just give everyone, our panelists, a round of applause.
Y'all, please vote.
Yes,
May
vote.
21st and
And
November.
I'm sure they will be walking around out here and on their way out if you all want to
Yes.
stop and say
Please
anything.
stay involved. I know this was a kind of a one-sided conversation. Please stay involved. I'm on the Law School Alumni Council. I'm really concerned with what you all are doing, so thank you.
Thank you, guys.